Greetings from Kenwell. Today is Saturday, April 19th, 2025. I love this little comic on my right. For sale. Single owner tomb. Only used 3 days and still has that new tomb cell. Reason for sale, resident was resurrected. I have to tell you, this is great stuff. Tomorrow we celebrate the greatest event in all of human history, and that is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I'm going to show you a little movie clip, but first let me set up the background story. Jesus had just died by being crucified on a cross. Historically, we know that he had died from eyewitness accounts. One eyewitness, the Apostle John, says something amazing that happened at the end of the resurrection. The Roman soldiers, they wanted to make sure that Jesus was dead, so one of the soldiers thrust a spear into Jesus' side. What happened next was amazing. It is recorded in the Gospel of John, chapter 19, verse 34, but one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once there came out blood and water. Now it wasn't until something like the 1800s when pathologists knew that whenever there is a separation of blood and water, that is a clear sign of death. So now we know historically that Jesus died on that cross. We not only have the account of the crucifixion of Jesus in the New Testament, but there are also many ancient sources outside the New Testament. For example, look at this wonderful chart that I have to my right. To just name a few of them, the names there, we have Josephus, who was a first century Jewish historian that worked for the Romans. And Tacitus, a Roman senator who showed no sympathy whatsoever to the Jews. Pliny the Younger, who was a governor. Lucian, a high-ranking Roman official, and even in the Jewish Talmud, Jesus is mentioned. Now, the Jewish Pharisees had heard Jesus saying that he was going to rise from the dead on the third day. One of the passages where this is said is in Matthew 20, verse 18-19. Behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered to the chief priests and scribes, and they will condemn him to death, and deliver him to the Gentiles to be mocked and scourged and crucified. And he will be risen on the third day. Because of Jesus saying many times that he was going to rise again on the third day, the Pharisees got guards to be at the tomb just in case Jesus' disciples tried to steal the body of Jesus and make it look like Jesus had risen from the dead. Here is a wonderful reenactment of what happened on the third day.
The Roman seal has been broken. The tomb is now open and the Nazarene is gone.
What do you mean, gone?
I love that clip. Just think how these soldiers would have reacted. They had just seen this angel come down from heaven, and then the scriptures tell us in Matthew 28 verse 2, and behold, there was a great earthquake, for the angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone from the door and sat upon it. And this stone, it weighs something like 1,500 kilograms. I am sure that these soldiers were terrified of what they had just seen. If the commanding officer ordered his men to attack, there was no way on God's green earth that they were going anywhere near that angel. There are many proofs that Jesus rose from the dead. For the sake of time, I am only to give you 3, and then I'm going to tell you about the most important proof of all. So now, the first proof is the resurrection of Jesus was the empty tomb. Everyone in Jerusalem know where Jesus was buried, and now the grave was empty. I am sure that many people from Jerusalem would go out and verify for themselves that the tomb was empty. The Jewish leaders, they made up a story saying that the disciples came and stole the body of Jesus. But think about it. First of all, the disciples ran for their lives after Jesus died on the cross, as they thought they were going to be next. There was no way that these scared disciples were going to confront trained Roman soldiers. If they did, they would all have been killed. Then the account of the resurrection tells us that women were the first to learn that Jesus rose from the dead. In that patriarchal society, a woman's testimony was never accepted. Yet, in the New Testament, the gospel writers chose to tell the truth that it was the women who first knew that Jesus had risen from the dead. Then we have 1 Corinthians 15 verse 6. Then he appeared to more than 500 brethren at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Here the Apostle Paul tells that over 500 people saw Jesus alive after he rose from the dead. And Paul is telling them, if you don't believe what I'm saying, go and ask these people, since most of them are still alive. I want you to think about this. How would you respond if you saw Jesus, who you knew for certainty had died? The first thing people would say, I can't believe it. It is him standing in front of me. Then I'm sure that almost everyone there is now a believer that Jesus is God. After all, how many people do you know that have died and come back from the dead? Romans 10 verse 9 says, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. This is how my wonderful journey started as a Christian. I then started to read the New Testament and to pray and to tell others about what Jesus has done for me. I hope you will do the same. And as I love to say, may the good Lord be with you until we meet again.